Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live podcast interview to talk about all things related to digital transformation. This is a tech agnostic and independent view of the digital transformation world. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this live interview today is exciting. We're going to talk about top trends and predictions for 2025, which is a topic we covered a couple of weeks ago. I did sort of a solo cast on this, but this is going to be even more engaging and more enlightening because we have someone joining us to talk about this. So it will kind of go a little deeper into some of the things we talked about in that last episode. And then we'll talk about some things we didn't cover in that last episode. So this will be a great conversation here today. We'll talk about all the trends and things you need to know as you prepare your digital strategies for 2025. This live discussion is part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So if you don't already subscribe or follow that podcast, please go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can see all the past episodes we've done and keep track of the upcoming ones as well. That's transformationgroundcontrol.com. And that's a weekly podcast that covers things related to digital transformation. So by being here today, you're part of the live production and you get to be part of the show. So thanks for being here today. I'm going to take audience questions here as soon as we introduce our guests. We'll sort of dive in. I'll ask some questions, but I'm also going to take audience questions. So I encourage you to jump in with any comments or questions you have. What are your thoughts on some of the biggest trends in the digital transformation and technology space, and what questions you have for us, including our guest here today? And speaking of the chat, we're keeping an eye on the chat here. We're going to see whatever questions you have. We're going to get to those questions. But if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today, because I always love to see where in the world everyone is joining. We tend to draw in a global community, so it's always fun to see that as well. So please drop in the chat city and country you're joining from, and thanks for being here. So joining us to talk about this topic, top trends and predictions for 2025, is Sam Gupta from Elevate IQ. Sam is someone who's been on this podcast before. He's technically a bitter rival. We are technically enemies, but but we are actually friends too. So I don't know.
This is what makes it fun.
Exactly. So, all kidding aside, though, Sam, you're a great guy. I appreciate having you here again. Thanks for being here today, Sam.
Of course, always good to be with you, Eric.
Absolutely. And you've been on here a couple times, but for those that don't know you and don't know your company, maybe talk a little bit about yourself, your background, as well as what Elevate IQ does.
Yeah, happy to. So Sam Gupta, Elevate IQ, been in the industry for roughly 20 years, covering digital transformation. And Elevate IQ has very similar focus as Third Stage, as Eric pointed out. So very, very, very similar focus in terms of the change management, any sort of enterprise software technology selection. So that's pretty much it from my side, Eric.
Absolutely. So how did you tell us a little bit about how you got into this space, or sort of how you grew up in the technology and consulting space? How did that happen?
Yeah. So, my background is with the system integrators, very large consulting firms, just like you, Eric, I guess. I mean, that's how you started. So I was doing very enterprise focused work, back in the day. So a lot of big SIs, my background is more into the implementation side of things. So that's why I probably bring a very unique perspective to this. So that's how I started. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Similar upbringings, you and I have, and great minds think alike, but you and I also have differing opinions and sort of diverse thoughts on some of this stuff. So it'll be really good to chat through some of this here today. I want to get in just to the audience real quick. Thank you for those that are chiming in on where you're joining from today. We have someone joining from Calgary here today. We have Olaf from Manchester. So thanks for being here today. And then Frank is joining here from Germany, just as a couple examples from Bielefeld, Germany. I've never heard of that city or I've been there. So I'm curious to hear more about that. So thanks for being here today, Frank. And again, if you want to drop in the chat where you're joining from, I'd love to hear from you. So Sam, just to sort of jump in, if you and I chatted about this before today. We chatted about the list you've been compiling of some of the top trends you've been thinking about. You've actually adjusted the trends recently based on geopolitical stuff that's emerged, specifically the U.S. election here in recent weeks. You think that'll affect some of the trends we talk about here? But if you're just to summarize before we sort of jump into some of this list that you have here, what would you say is like what sort of jumps out at you is like if you were to summarize and give us a headline of what you think we should expect in 2025? I know that's a tough question because there's a lot of different directions you can go with that, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take the macro view that I generally take, me, how I work, I guess, right, and think. So I'm going to provide the overarching view of where everything is and why we had to update the trends. And obviously with trends as well, I mean, we are updating them on a daily basis because any variables that are sort of changing in the market, that impacts the global economy. And based on that, we are sort of observing and changing. But obviously we have to publish these trends yearly at point, so we cannot keep them on a rolling basis. But overarchingly speaking, I guess, previous administration versus the new incoming administration that is going to come in the US is going to have substantial impact on the global economy that we already know. I mean, we still have some of the after effects of pandemic that are still prevalent in the market at this point of time. And by the way, this all impacts the digital transformation market. It's going to impact how many ERP digital transformation projects we are going to get. Okay, it impacts every single consultant that we have in the room, their career. So it impacts all of us, and that's why we start with the macro view. Okay, how the overarching market is going to be, and this is also going to change the state of any of the movements that are happening in the industry. Whether any of the companies are being consolidated, because that actually changes the whole architecture. It changes the game of the ERP. So going back to the macro view, right? So number one, I mean, the incoming administration that we have, they are going to have substantially different policies. They are probably going to reverse everything that the previous administration did, right?
Right.
That's how politics work.
Right.
So some of the things that we are going to notice is that most likely it's probably going to be better for the economy. But at the same time, we know that the new administration is probably going to be slightly unpredictable.
Right.
And that is something that market does not appreciate. So now how people are going to feel, how CFOs are going to feel based on that will dictate, how the economy is going to do. So our prediction is that probably in H1, I don't think we are going to see much changes as such, overall from the economy perspective. Maybe H2, there might be some changes. Now, coming back to your interest rate, right? So interest rate have sort of come down right now, but they are not sort of there yet for the market to gain confidence. There are some economies that are doing well, some economies that are not doing well. Global prediction is that right now, I guess, in 2025, we are probably going to have very similar global economy. US might do well. I don't know at this point of time, depending upon how things go. And that all is going to impact pretty much everything. So this is just the macro view, right? Now, we are going to touch on the macro view as we discuss the trends, but then, that is also going to have things such as your AI, how that is going to impact the market. So we'll be touching on that. I don't know if that provides a little background for you.
It does. It really does. Because then you think about, I mean, you touch on a couple really important points. One being the increase in, sort of M&A activity. I know that's something we talked about before this podcast or before today's discussion too, about how M&A activity will probably pick up. There might be more consolidation as a result. And that's something, as a buyer, you have to think about is, if you've got I know we can't predict the future. We don't know who's going to get acquired or who's going to merge with who as far as software technology providers, but it's just something to be aware of that's likely to affect the software space.
Yeah. So some of the comments there, I guess, on that. So some of the deals that were not going through in the previous administration, I think they are going to go through now because this administration is going to be far more receptive. Even if the market is going to be slightly more, I don't know whether you want to use the term monopolized or oligopolized, whatever you want to use. But, there is going to be a little bit more consolidation. The bigger companies are going to have much higher power in general. So let's go back to some of the deals of the last year that could not go through. Salesforce was acquiring Informatica. They were sort of hush-hush, I don't know, whether they wanted or not wanted, right? But that didn't go through. So now those kind of deals might go through, and that is going to impact the entire enterprise software market. The second deal, Google acquiring HubSpot, that did not go through. So now these kind of deals may go through. And what this does is it basically, I don't know whether you want to use the term bloat or further consolidation of any of the suites that we are going to have in the market. And, from our perspective, we track roughly 200 different categories. So you obviously ERP is just one category. People sort of think about ERP, that ERP is everything. That's not how the market works. That's not how the categories work, right? So we are going to have ERP suite that is going to be further consolidated because of these consolidation reasons. Then CRM is a suite in itself. WMS is a suite in itself. Supply chain is a suite in itself. Analytics is a suite in itself. So there are many suites and categories are are there, and they all are going to be consolidated based on how the market is moving. So depending upon how the forces move, I think we are going to see a lot more changes in the market, from the ERP perspective.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and it's interesting because you're right. We saw some early signs of that consolidation, and it's always been a thing, right? I mean, I think the tech space is always innovating. You're getting startups, but then someone will come along and buy up those startups, and it just creates it creates innovation, quite frankly. So, I mean, I think it's a good thing. And then as these smaller tech companies get bought up by the bigger ones, it just creates an opening for another smaller tech company to come around and fill some gap or fill some niche that the bigger guys aren't addressing well. What are your thoughts on? So one thing you mentioned in your list, you sent me, kind of your list of. Is this like just for background sake, just so we all understand it? Is this a list that you publish each year, or is this kind of your list of? Okay. So one of the things on your list that jumped out at me, and we'll kind of go through. We probably won't get through all 15 of your predictions here, but we'll pick off a few of them. And actually, before I ask you this question, I'd love to hear from the audience just before we jump in. I'd love to hear from the audience what you think the biggest trends are. Like, what's the trend you're most excited about, or what trend do you have the most questions about? Love to hear your feedback. So please drop that in the chat, and we're going to come back to those comments here in just a minute. But one thing you had in here, Sam, that was really interesting. You had a lot of interesting points in here, but one was AI augmented agents and AI governance platforms. Help us understand that, because that's not something you hear a lot of people talking about right now. At least I don't.
Yeah, so I guess, this is definitely going to be one of the trends that is going to be prominent. And I'm going to give you some more background there, why this is a trend in the market, right? And that is probably going to sort of connect with another trend that we have on our list. So number one thing is the overall market pressure, right? The enterprise software vendors at this point of time, if you look at their revenue pressure, they are feeling pressure, and they have to do something about it because the demand is not as much as they would want, from the growth perspective. Investors are looking for, hey, give me like 15% growth, 20% growth, 30% growth. That is not happening. So they are asking for that. So because of that price pressure, now how do you justify your license price? So they have to come up with something. So what is that something at this point of time, right? So either you are going to sort of consolidate, bring the synergy so that your deal size is going to be bigger, or you have to promote something at this point of time. If you look at companies like Salesforce, they are positioning themselves as, hey, I'm probably going to have 1 billion agents in next 5 years. I don't know what was that timeline, but they are very aggressively working on that. And the only companies that are doing well on Wall Street at this point of time from the tech perspective, they must have some sort of AI flavor, because all of these AI agents, for you as a buyer or the consumer, you might not feel as much of a difference, but the vendors are working on these capabilities because that is where they are going to make money. That's how they are going to justify their price tag. So every single category in the market, whether you talk about CRM category, HCM category, ERP category, all of these are going to have these AI agents embedded in that. If you look at some of the enterprises are actually going to drive the experience. Okay, we are already noticing, and I don't know, Eric, whether you have been following a lot of people, who are in the recruiting space at this point of time. Okay, they are already feeling that, because recruiting is where you have the sort of labor of love, is what I like to call, right? That's where you have a lot of manual effort, for the recruitment team as well as for the candidate, right? So what they are doing is they have already implemented some of these AI agents, and the candidates are reporting this is the first time in the history, that they are saying that I actually like recruitment flow. Can you believe this? Okay, because everybody hates recruiting. Nobody wants to apply. I don't think anybody has ever said that, okay, I really appreciated this whole recruitment process with the company, but at this point of time, when they are interacting with these AI agents, they are appreciating that. So this is the front end part of the process. Now, the similar process is going to be there whether you are, coming as a customer, because if you look at the traditional bots, they were extremely boring overall from the experience perspective. But now this experience is going to be far more interactive. So we are going to see these agents, embedded with every single category, whether you are going to look at the front end, back end, and then this is going to be the whole flow. Because of that, there's going to be another category that is going to be created, which companies are already working on that, which is going to be governance platform. There are going to be compliance issues from the government perspective. They are mandating. Right. So there are going to be new categories of software, I guess.
Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. It's exciting to think about how we've only scratched the surface of how AI is going to impact enterprise technology and how it's going to impact businesses in general. So it's exciting to think of how some of these trends will unfold like you're describing here. Here's a follow-up question from the audience I think is really interesting. This is from Timothy on LinkedIn. Timothy has a prediction. He says AI-driven platform consolidations with the drive for optimizations. If a tool or service isn't feeding the company's AI choice, then it will be left out and diminished value contribution. So I guess that's a question. How important is AI for these enterprise tech providers that aren't, sort of legacy AI providers, if you will, or they're not standalone AI providers? What do you think of Timothy's prediction here?
Yeah, so this is very interesting, and it's always a very interesting debate. And I always like to sort of, segment the perspective. Whose perspective are we talking about? Are we talking about investors' perspective, or are we talking about consumers or buyers' perspectives? Okay, so investors, they are going to have very different priorities, because they are, in most cases, they are probably investing for long term, especially the investors that are investing in AI at this point of time. Okay, so they don't want to miss the bus. That's why they are investing, right? So they are going to take slightly more long term prediction, and even if they might not get anything in the next year or two, they are probably going to be okay, depending upon the strategy of any of the hedge funds, or any of the private equity that are actually investing in AI. But overall, I guess, I mean, this is slightly more drastic, I would say. I don't think it's going to be as extreme, regardless of whether you are going to utilize AI in your workflows or not. I don't think there is going to be as much impact. Obviously, we will find that out probably in next 4 or 5 years, how that is going to be. But as companies adopt, the customer experience is going to change, the employee experience is going to change, and that is going to dictate, how much value companies are getting, and based on that, they will decide. But it's not that the companies are going to become irrelevant, I guess, if they don't use AI at this point of time. I think that's slightly more extreme.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, how about one thing well, actually, before I move on, I don't want to miss this point, because I don't want to ruin the flow here, but this is from Andy on LinkedIn. This is an interesting question he's got. Andy says, embedding an AI agent brings many issues, such as integration and upgrades. A better solution is for the software provider, such as Oracle, to have AI built into the core product. A bolt-on AI solution carries baggage. What do you think? So it's kind of coming back to this point of standalone AI versus AI embedded within enterprise tech. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so this is also very interesting, and you are absolutely right, Andy, that we are going to have newer problems. We are going to have interesting problems. The debugging, the maintenance of these AI workflows are going to be far more difficult, because now machine is sort of controlling your workflow, and that's where you are going to see a lot more categories. Eric, if you don't mind, can you bring the comment?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so I can keep touching on that. So so obviously the AI workflows that they are going to have, it's actually going to have more tools that are going to be there. So these are going to be newer categories, and that's what is called the AI governance workflows. And as the regulation changes, because at this point of time, we don't know how governments are going to react. Some are slightly more extreme, some are, they are sort of watching at this point of time, what is going to be impact. I mean, I don't want to create policies if there is not going to be much of an impact. They don't want to block technology. They want to see how the impact is, and based on that, they are going to decide, and that will impact, how the reporting is going to be, how the compliance is going to be, what kind of debugging we need to implement as part of our AI workflows. So I think the point that they are trying to make, Andy is trying to make, is a better solution is for the software provider to have AI built into the core product. Sure, I mean, that's what the software vendors are going to do. You are not going to know much from your perspective. I mean, it's only going to be that, okay, you probably have superior customer experience or employee experience, or the user experience, right? That's what you're going to feel. But as such, when you are going to debug these workflows, it's going to be much harder. So they are going to provide more tools. So obviously, it's a big revenue stream for them. And then you probably need to have more tools for yourself as well, because tool is a tool. You still have your processes, you still have data. So you need to sort of combine them together and figure out, okay, what is happening with these tools, with the newer processes, especially the ones that are going to be AI enabled. So we are going to have a lot more need for the traceability, I guess, if I could use that term. And then AI is also going to help with traceability, because now what AI can do is, it can sort of mine the data, provide you the insight. So, and the whole research that is happening in the AI space at this point of time is the auditability of AI. So they are still working on that. It might not be as accurate, but there are going to be a lot of research and development in that space for sure.
Yeah, really interesting. What about, here's an interesting one I think might stir up some controversy. And I'm glad you have this in your list because it's something I think is a problem or opportunity, depending on how you look at it. But your number 4 on your list that you sent me in advance was cloud and SaaS expense reduction and SaaS licensing price pressure. Tell us about that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, we are already seeing this, right? And, Eric, I'm pretty sure you have probably tracked this as well. For example, right now, again, going back to the price pressure, right? They have to create revenue somehow. So how do you create revenue? And with cloud, in general, the vendors have a lot more power in terms of what they can do. Even if they make a minor change, you are not going to it's going to be a minor change just from the tier to tier, right? You have tier 1, you have tier 2. Tier 1 may have, they might have these limitations baked in the contract that, okay, you are only allowed, I don't know, maybe 500,000 transactions. Even if they say that, I have user-based pricing, but you have these limitations baked in the contract, sometimes they are going to be spelled out. Sometimes they are not going to be spelled out, right? So because of the price pressure, what is going to happen is, if they are struggling with the revenue, they are going to increase the price. For example, let's say you look at categories such as your Smartsheet, Monday.com, Airtable. These 3 are newer categories. All of them are $1 billion in ARR at this point of time. That's how hot these technologies are. I don't know how many ERP vendors have a billion ARR, right? So these are the categories, and they started very small. They started creating a new category called collaboration. The collaboration was always difficult from the client interaction perspective. Sure, you had a bunch of portals, you had a bunch of commerce gurus that were saying that you have collaboration, but the collaboration wasn't there as much. So that's what categories such as your Smartsheet, Monday.com, they changed with respect to collaboration. But initially what they were doing is, hey, I'll give you your collaborative user for free, just the way Acumatica prices their product, right? But now they said, now I don't know, I'm going public. A newer private equity, acquired them, and they are actually going to change the price, and that price change could be substantial for you. So this is going to be across the categories, across the software. So any of the SaaS categories that you are using, you might get a surprise bill of $1 million, $2 million. And what are you going to do after that? So that's going to be a challenge that we are going to see, depending upon how good the market is doing. If the market is doing good, then they don't have as much price pressure. Then they will try to acquire more market share. But if they are not able to grow because of the demand, then they have to find ways of doing that. And that's where you are going to get this. We have already seen this in 2023. You are going to see a lot more in 2024. Sorry, 2025.
Right. Yeah. No, super interesting. I agree. I think, I also think, one of the predictions I had too, and I'm curious to see what you think, is I feel like there's going to be a bit of backlash a little bit against the whole cloud and SaaS subscription pricing model, because you're right. There's this push to drive this annual recurring revenue. You used the term ARR a minute ago, and that's what investors want. They want to see annual recurring revenue, but these are investors for the software vendors. So it helps them. But the question is going to become, at what point do customers push back and say, hey, this is too much of a spend? Our OpEx costs have gotten out of control now. We've gotten rid of a bunch of capital expenditure over here by not having these on-prem systems that we depreciate and have to maintain and all that stuff. But now we've just shifted those costs over to an OpEx, and now that OpEx keeps going up. At some point, they're going to have to push back. It's just natural pendulum swing type stuff that I would think is going to happen there.
Yeah, so I don't know if on-prem is going to be the future, to be completely honest, because it's not going to get as much R&D. Don't expect any AI, development on that. It's not.
I don't think cloud's going anywhere. I just think the cost pressure is where you're going to see the shift. To your point.
Exactly. So let's see. It's very early to predict at this point of time how that is going to go. Obviously, vendors are going to have a lot more cloud. Yes, the vendors are going to be competing with each other as well. But at this point of time, the pricing is fairly even, I would say, across the vendors. Some are going to be slightly more expensive, but depending upon how commoditized it gets. depending upon how much control they have on the installation. With most ERP, I mean, you are looking at roughly 2-3 years, right? So they have a lot more pressure in general on the customer. They have a lot more control in the cloud. So they don't really have an incentive to reduce. In fact, I mean, in general, the way most enterprise software vendors, the way they work is they are going to substantially discount. And you know this, Eric, right? How this works. You get in a deal, you are going to get substantially discounted price. And as soon as you go live, your price becomes, I don't know, 2x, 3x, 4x.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's very true. Here's this is actually there's 2 points I'm going to get to from Suhail on LinkedIn. I'm going to start with one around some of the geopolitical stuff you were talking about a moment ago, Sam, when you first started talking about this.
Yeah.
You were talking about some of the, how does the incoming U.S. administration affect the global enterprise tech space? And so Suhail on LinkedIn says, from a political standpoint, I see that U.S. leadership wants to move manufacturing from Canada and Mexico back to the U.S. Hence, companies will invest in manufacturing ERP systems upgrade implementations in the U.S. and Canada, and Mexico will see a slump in manufacturing ERP upgrades and implementations. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you think do you think we'll see that? Do you think you'll see more activity now in the U.S. for ERP types of projects and maybe less in other countries where manufacturing is being moved away? Or is there an opportunity for technology to help some of these displaced manufacturers be more effective? Or what do you think about that?
So this is a very interesting point. And, I think we have heard this a couple of times. What is the impact of supply chain on any software categories, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So number one thing, I guess, any software, enterprise software is a model. And model requires some sort of streamlining, stabilization. If the stabilization is not going to be there from the geopolitical perspective, if that is going to be sort of the moving target, you cannot define your processes. So overall, in my perspective, I don't think the changing supply chain have the direct impact on the software processes. If anything, if there is going to be a lot of movement, companies are simply going to slow down the process that, okay, I'm not going to change anything right now because we don't know how my targeted state is going to be, right? So overall, I guess, from the geopolitical perspective at this point of time, and that's what the uncertainty part I was talking about, that, okay, the new administration, US administration is threatening that, okay, they are going to have these tariffs, but I don't know whether tariffs are going to go through. If the tariffs go through, then there is going to be a different problem. I mean, tariffs are in general very inflationary. So we are going to have impact. So now because of that, are we going to get recession? Nobody knows. We have to see how these forces are going to work together to be able to understand, what is going to be the overarching impact. But there is a possibility that, US might get a lot more manufacturing in general, the kind of controls that they are going to be putting in, the kind of incentives they are going to have. But it will take a long time before we understand whether you are going to have the real impact on the supply chain, and do you need to change the processes because of that?
Yeah. And speaking of that, one of your, maybe I'll just pull this out as one of your number 7 prediction here was geopolitical impact on business processes. So, and you just mentioned that. So to maybe expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind. What do you mean by, how do geopolitics affect business processes in particular?
Yeah, so geopolitics is going to have impact on the overarching, business dynamics, and that is actually going to change your architecture and the consolidation. So because of geopolitics, okay, if the market is going to go down, then you are going to see a lot more consolidation. If you have a lot more consolidation, from the value chain integration perspective, whether you talk about manufacturer, distributor, or you talk about software consolidation, each of this is going to have some sort of impact on the business process, when you are going to buy the software. So geopolitics has impact from this force perspective, but it may not have the direct impact from the supply chain perspective. If the supply chains are going to be displaced because of that, whether there is going to be impact on the software or not. This is more from the deal flow perspective, slightly more macro view, as opposed to sort of the what is that called, the 4-wall planning, the factory planning view, I guess, company planning view.
Yeah, and another one that's similar that you had on this, which is actually your number 6 prediction, was continued reallocation of skill sets and their impact on business processes. So kind of continuing with this business process theme and the changes to business processes. What do you mean by reallocation of skill sets, and how does that impact business processes?
Yeah, so going back to the AI agent prediction, I mean, that is definitely real. We are going to see a lot more. That is probably a very near-term prediction, I would say, that you are going to see a lot more in general, whether that is going to be driven by large enterprises to their vendors, to their suppliers, or if this is going to be more of the consumer behavior and they are going to drive this change. So overall, I guess, based on these workflow changes, because now whatever workflows humans were doing, so either the workflow for humans is going to be augmented because they are going to probably do a little bit more value added activities, whether it is going to be just the debugging or support. So from the customer experience perspective, initially, let's look at a workflow of a customer support agent. Traditionally, they were trained maybe on, I don't know, maybe 1,000 questions. Okay, I'll teach you 1,000 questions you are going to support. And we all know how much we hated, the support, because we never get the answers that we are looking for from the support perspective. Now, AI agents can be trained on maybe, I don't know, 10,000, a million scenarios. So they are obviously going to be a lot more intelligent. So they might be able to do a lot of heavy lifting, but then obviously you are going to have an option that, okay, if you're not satisfied with the agent and if you want to go to the agent right away, then obviously the agent is going to have the workflow. So now the agents are going to require a lot more training, because they need to understand what has AI agent done. So that's where your reallocation of the responsibilities is going to be overall, in the enterprise, whether you talk about from the customer support perspective, where you are going to have AI workflows, from the finance processes perspective. So that is also going to change from the skill set perspective. The kind of skill sets that people are going to require is going to be very different. So there is going to be a lot of reshuffling. And based on that, your ERP processes are going to change. Whatever you have done in the past may not be relevant anymore in the new world. But how soon that is going to be is a question.
Yeah. Very interesting. Here's a interesting question from LinkedIn. This is from Menawendra on LinkedIn. He says, how would you predict fintech and healthcare going the cloud way? With trillions of bytes of data sitting on mainframes and resistance to spend on the cloud, majority of above said industry leadership feels spending on cloud migrations can be delayed, and they prioritize the spend on the customer experience or operational efficiency front. What's your view around the business transformation around these industries? And again, that's around fintech and healthcare.
Yeah, so fintech and healthcare, they are very interesting industries. They were never sort of the core enterprise software, core ERP centric industries, because they were almost like IT shops, to be completely honest. They had a lot of custom development. I mean, you are looking at roughly 3,000, 4,000 internally developed applications. We have seen some changes there in the market. Overall, if you look at, tools such as your ServiceNow, now they are doing a lot more development because they are taking slightly more platform-centric approach. That's where Palantir is getting a lot of momentum because they are doing a lot of platform-centric approach. But overall, I guess, with this question, when is mainframe going to go away is the question, I guess, right? And it's not that companies have not tried. They have tried. For example, let's say I'll take an example of airline, because airline is a very interesting industry. It's very unique. People sort of talk about it. People kind of say that, an ERP consultant can probably fix the airline. We were having these interesting debates with, and Eric, John Reed as well, right? In his room, that, they were all talking about airline, how much we are going to do this, but they don't understand that, okay, any of the ERP systems that were designed for the entire industry, they were slightly different. Okay. So, and the reason why they were different is because the number of touches that you have in the processes is almost like millions. Okay. So if you look at the supply chain suite, when you look at the internal supply chain and you look at external supply chain, okay, these two are two different things. With external supply chain, you are looking at, I don't know how many touches. Similar scenario is there for the airline as well. With the airline, you have the travel agents that are touching some of the traditional mainframe system, and the workload is so high that any systems, at least the modern UI based systems, they are not able to replace that, because the amount of overhead that you get with these UI driven systems, for example ERP systems, the processes are not able to handle that. And that's why they were never able to replace those mainframe systems. Now, is that going to happen in the new world? Possible. Okay. Now we have things such as your Palantir. They are much better. But again, that's not the application platform as such. So we are going to see a lot more platforms in the market that are going to probably be able to do similar workload lifting that was possible in mainframe. So there is a possibility. We are not there yet. We have seen these scenarios. For example, let's say if you look at E2 Opens of the world, you look at Blue Yonders of the world, they are able to do a lot more. But we have also seen, Blue Yonder cybersecurity issue recently.
Right.
So it's hard to believe
Right.
how much they are able to do, how modern their code is, to be completely honest, to be able to replace these things, because they were, obviously very good. I mean, we have not had any issues, at least from the security perspective, from the transactional processing perspective. They at least work.
Right. That's true. Yeah, very true. And here's an interesting question, which I like this question because it sort of bridges the gap between these longer term predictions and sort of short term where we are right now. This is from Ashish on LinkedIn. And Ashish says, Eric and Sam, for organizations just starting with AI agent integration and ERP, what low-hanging fruit or quick wins are popularly seen? So this is a kind of an interesting dilemma that a lot of companies have, is they see this future possibility and all the future opportunities with AI. But then the question becomes, well, we're not going to do that stuff overnight. All this great stuff you've been talking about, Sam, isn't going to happen overnight. So what sort of smaller incremental steps have you seen companies, or have you seen companies taking any low-hanging fruit types of approaches to AI?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question. And again, from the ERP or integration perspective, I don't think things are going to change much. Okay, so in my mind, I think what is changing is almost like an ingredient of the dish or recipe that you were cooking. Okay, so now this is going to change more from the vendor perspective. They are going to provide you these capabilities. It might change your workflows, but as such, you don't have to do much. You simply need to understand the workflow. So things are going to change a little bit from the implementation perspective, but not necessarily from the integration perspective, I guess. That would be my take. Each of these systems are going to be slightly more, I guess, better in user experience?
Yeah.
Right. But as such, I don't think you can buy AI agents and integrate them with your ERP. If you're going to do that, that's probably going to fire back in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, you had another one here. Okay, here's another prediction you had on your list. Number 11 on your list was continued digital transformation failures and a focus on enterprise architecture. You would think so you and I have been doing this for a long time, right? You would think after all this time of you and I being in the space, some people have been in the space for longer than us, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think we have all seen sort of similar patterns over time. And companies keep making the same mistakes in terms of how they screw up these projects. But at the same time, technology is advancing. You would think that technology is getting easier. It should be easier to deploy. You would think transformation failures would be going down. But you and I both agree on this point. They're not going down. They're actually, in my opinion, they're increasing. But what are your thoughts here? Why are these failures? First of all, why do you think these failures are continuing to happen, and what could companies do to do things differently?
Yeah, so Eric, I guess, we have discussed this, right? So one thing that we both agree on is overall, if you look at the underlying reasons why these failures, happen, it's always going to be some sort of misalignment, misunderstanding in terms of how to make them successful. You are going to have these premeditated notions that this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to hire companies like Elevate IQ Third Stage, and they are magicians, and they are somehow going to fix it, right? That's not how these implementations work. Okay, and there is also a big misunderstanding in the market is that somehow these cloud systems are easier. You don't necessarily require as much expertise. I actually say the opposite. Okay, cloud is much harder. Cloud is much harder than on-prem. With on-prem, things were much easier. And the reason for that is because you had a lot more control on your code base. You had a lot more control on your database. That control is not there in cloud. With cloud, your pricing layers are very different. The pricing layers are very crafty. They are designed to sort of get foot in the door and then probably increase afterwards, right? And now with all of these changes, whenever you are going to have uncertainty in the market, what is going to happen is you are going to see a lot more overlap in the categories. And when we say categories, we are talking about 200 different categories that I mentioned initially. ERP is a category. People are super confused what an ERP is. There's a lot of misunderstanding in the market. Everybody's ERP in 2024, 2025. Likewise, CRMs are becoming bloated. The analytics suites are becoming bloated. Every single category in the market is becoming bloated. Now you require real expertise to be able to understand which process is going to belong where, and how do you find that clarity. Okay, that's where people are going to struggle a lot, because that drives everything from the master data governance perspective. If you cannot figure this out, if you're simply going, okay, feature 1, feature 2, feature 3, I'm going to put it here, that's not going to work.
Right.
And that is also going to impact your licensing. So that's why now, based on the consolidation that we are going to see in the market, based on the category overlap, unless we have clarity, from the category perspective, that clarity is not going to happen. The vendors are not going to listen. Everybody's trying to go after pretty much every single capability out there. So it takes time before they mature and they figure out that probably I should not be keeping this, right? But that's not happening in 2024, 2025, when they are really struggling for revenue. They are trying their best to do whatever they can do in their power. They are trying to acquire as many capabilities, and these categories are going to become thicker and thicker, and the confusion is going to be there. And that's why we are going to see a lot more failure in general.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also the impact to the businesses too. You talk about the control or the lack thereof, the lack of control you have over your own code. It's also, the lack of control over your own operations, business processes, which you've alluded to too. So in other words, in the past, for better or for worse, you could take your on-prem system and you could customize it to do whatever you wanted it to do. And it made the adoption a little bit easier. Now you could argue that you got diminished business value, because if you're customizing things in the software, maybe you're creating too much risk or complicating things more than you need to, but you could do it. But now with cloud, you have limited flexibility. So it's sort of creating more disruption in the upgrade or in the implementations themselves, which is part of why, we've gained some things with cloud technologies, but now we're creating more risks in other ways too. And that operational and organizational change side of things, I think, is where you see a lot of that pain.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think both of these things are super connected. So when I say you are losing flexibility meaning you cannot do whatever you were able to do in the on-prem world in the cloud, because you are going to run into limitations, and that will not allow you to modify the way you were modifying. The other point that you need to understand is that you may have lived with these customizations in the past, but it's going to be much harder in 2025, 2026. And I'll tell you this, okay? With AI, one of the things that is going to be really stronger, and that we have not touched so far on our list, Eric, is going to be the whole cybersecurity space, okay? So with cybersecurity, I mean, if you look at how hackers operated, their mindset always was, hey, I'm a hacker, my job is to create biggest impact. My job, if I'm putting my life in danger, I need to make more money. Right. That's how they think. So they were only targeting, let's say, the bigger organizations. So smaller organizations, even if let's say your workloads may not be as secure, you may have a lot of customization, you are managing somehow, whatever, you hired a 20-year-old guy and somehow they were they were managing your workloads. That is going to change, because now you are going to have AI. They have access to the same AI that you do, right? So now all of these small vendors can be targeted very easily. So what are you going to do? You just don't have the same capabilities. If you are going to have a lot of customization, even and Eric, again, I have a little bit more technical background, so I can talk about these things, I guess, right? Sure. So even a single line of code can be vulnerable. Okay, when you are customizing your ERP process, you are probably writing millions and millions of lines of code, and you are disrupting the state of the other pre-built processes or pre-built functions that were tested by the vendor. And by the way, you are actually going to void the warranty, because they are only responsible for their own state. If you are going to disrupt their state, then they are not responsible for that. So they are not accountable. So you are sort of taking that risk. So now in the new world, in 2025, if you are going to customize a lot, we are going to see very interesting trends that, okay, we are going to see a lot more cybersecurity issues. We are going to see a lot more issues similar to CrowdStrike that we saw in 2024. So now we will see the real impact of software supply chain. And we have already seen that software supply chain is as powerful or more powerful than your real supply chain. That can disrupt the whole world. So once government understand, because right now 90% of the government, they sort of get it, but they always feel that IT systems are all back end, we are not going to have as much impact. So there is not real pressure from the government in terms of how these things need to be monitored. But there will be regulatory changes once they learn that this could be as disruptive. They have already seen, and they are already thinking about it.
Yeah. That makes sense. What about, and speaking, you were talking about, back to the cybersecurity thread you were just talking about. John on YouTube has a question here that says, I'd like to know your perspective on zero trust architecture governance in 2025. Key drivers. And I'm aware of, just as a disclaimer, I'm aware of zero trust at a high level, but I am not an architecture or cybersecurity guy at all. So I don't know if you know much about this, Sam, or if you have any thoughts on zero trust architecture and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would rather not comment on that. I'm probably not qualified to comment.
I'm not either. So sorry, John. It's one of the few times you'll stump both the guest and I. So we should do like you should get a reward or something, or an award.
We need to get a cybersecurity guy here, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. Here's one I think you can answer. I think both of us could probably answer this one. This is from Ashish on LinkedIn. She says, any recommendations how businesses can invest in upskilling their workforce to adapt to the upcoming AI enhanced ERP era? It's a good question.
It's a good question. So I guess right now, if you're going to do anything, I'm not sure how that's going to go, to be completely honest. It's too early. So in my mind, what I would do is monitor the changes in terms of what is happening and what kind of skill sets are you going to require. And obviously, what everybody does is they simply watch what their competitors are doing. And everybody is simply going to follow, right? So depending upon what is happening in your industry, how receptive companies are with these things, and how the business processes are changing. Because one of the things that we are going to see is the whole customer experience changes. And as soon as that changes, either they are going to have some sort of impact on their deal. If they are able to sell cheaper, then obviously you are going to lose a lot. So then you have to think about those things. So those are going to be drivers. At this point of time, I don't know if you can do anything about it unless you are some sort of tech organization. Then it's a different case, because then you are getting pressure from your investors in terms of what you are doing for AI. But as such, let's say if you are end user, manufacturer, distributor, retail, these companies, I don't know what you can do right now, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and I think if there's any change management practitioners or experts on the session here today, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But the way I view AI and how it affects upskilling in the future is I feel like it's an organizational design discussion, because you have to first define, well, okay, AI is AI, right? Like, to your point, I totally agree, Sam. If you're a tech person, then yes, there's a lot of upskilling you need to do in terms of the technology behind AI. But if you're just a frontline employee, and how do I upskill my frontline employees to be AI enabled or to be prepared for AI? It just depends on how the job is going to change. So if I'm like if I'm a plant, let's say I'm a material resource planner, and I plan production, for a manufacturing company, and I've spent all these years using spreadsheets and complex manual ways of figuring out what the right production schedule is for my organization. And now you're telling me AI is going to come in and change that job. Well, first you have to figure out, well, how will AI change that job? And then what are you going to do with the time it potentially frees up? So if I free up 50% of that planner's time, then what do you want that person doing? And what, a lot of times you hear a lot of refrain about how, well, now we can be more strategic instead of doing all these manual processes. Now we can spend our time being strategic. Okay, well, what is that strategic? What does that mean? Like, what do you expect that person to do? And then that will give you the answer of how you want to upskill that particular person. I think I agree with you, Sam. There's no blanket recommendation we could really give that says here's how organizations should prepare for AI in general, other than to say, define what you want your processes and your people's jobs to look like, and then figure out what the gap is, what you're going to need to train them or upskill them. It's probably going to vary greatly depending on who you're talking about within any given organization.
Yeah, could not agree more.
Yeah, good stuff. So I want to come back to another point you had here. You number 15 on your list was race to quantum technologies. This is another one that I hear a little bit about this, but again, I like that you're drawing this out because I think it's super interesting. But first of all, help us understand what quantum technologies are and why you think this is becoming such an emerging trend.
Yeah, so quantum overall, I guess I'll give you the layman's version, and I'm pretty sure, Eric, you probably already know it. I don't know, how many listeners are going to know about it or not. But overall, I mean, traditional technologies, the way computer systems are designed, we were in sort of ones and zeros, right? So everything needs to be translated in ones and zeros. It was very binary experience, right? With qubits that we have with quantum, now they can do a lot more processing. So that's why you are going to get get a lot more multiprocessing that was not possible with the traditional computing systems. So that's where you are going to get the firepower of the processing. The challenge that we have in the market with respect to quantum technologies is that they are not as accurate, because when you are going to do this multiprocessing, they sort of collide. They are not just as accurate to be used in the real world. And there are other challenges. For example, one of the things that you have, I don't know whether you have heard this term called Q-Day. And Q-Day is going to be the whole quantum cryptography, and they are talking about that there's going to be this issue of the Y2K, in the new quantum world, because each of the encryption algorithms, the way they were designed, and if listeners are not familiar with encryption, then any of the secure communication that you have at this point of time, that happens using your encryption algorithm, and that is actually going to break with the new quantum technologies. So Q-Day is going to be almost like Y2K, that I don't have the year numbering scheme that is sort of scaling up. So
Right.
what do you do? So that's where a lot more research is going to be. Now, why is that more important right now in 2024, 2025? The reason why it is important is because of AI. AI, if you look at AI, is really struggling at this point of time. They just don't have as much processing power. They are really bottlenecking this more from the energy perspective. They just don't have that. So that's where the quantum becomes far more relevant now, that, okay, you need to expedite the research for quantum if you want to capitalize on AI capabilities. So this is going to be a race, okay? Whether you want to be ahead with your technical capabilities, or they are going to slow down a little bit because AI is too powerful. We don't know at this point of time what's going to happen, okay? Based on, what is going to be ahead. Is it going to be technology, or the government or the regulations are going to be ahead? But in general, right now, governments are really excited. They are investing a lot more in the quantum technologies at this point of time. Again, that is very much in the R&D phase at this point of time. That is not going to be in the commercial phase that you are going to see any sort of business value, I don't know, maybe in 10, 20 years. But if we had forecasted 10 years back, okay, what are we going to see from AI perspective? Nobody would have predicted that, in 2024, we are going to get ChatGPT.
Right.
But here we are, we have that, right? So right now, governments are really excited about quantum technologies. They are investing a lot more in research. They are prioritizing that because there's a real money to be made, and that's what everybody wants, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, that's makes total sense. And then speaking of that, you touched on this, but number 12 on your list is energy efficient algorithms and computing. So is that sort of what you're alluding to there with like the impact or the prerequisite for having lots of power to fuel AI and the data centers that in the energy consumption that it's putting demands on?
Yeah, so both, I would say. So overall, I guess if you look at the state of algorithm at this point of time, right? So when you write a program, Eric, it's not going to be as efficient. You simply write something because you don't know what you're doing at this point of time, right? You sort of learn over the period of time. You sort of optimize once you learn how the algorithm is being used. So that's the state of any sort of technologies, AI technologies that we have at this point of time. They just don't know enough about that. And those are not necessarily optimized. They are optimizing. And because of the bottlenecking of the energy, so now there are going to be two things, or two drivers that are going to be there. Number one is going to be that, okay, they are going to make the code itself very efficient. So that is one driver, because if they don't do that, then they are sort of going to bottleneck and they will not be able to release as many features. And because of that, investors are not going to invest. That you committed for something, now you are not able to deliver. So that's one force. The second force is going to be that we are going to see a lot more investment in the energy technologies in the market. So you are going to see that a lot more as well as a macro driver. So I guess it's both ways. It's not just one way, I guess, Eric.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And then one thing I want to come back to too, this is number 8 on your list, and then we'll close out with a couple audience questions. But number 8 on your list, that you alluded to this before, but I want to dive in a little bit more if you don't mind. And that was, there's more disruptions caused by supply chain and cybersecurity issues, or software supply chain and cybersecurity issues. Help us unpack that a bit.
Yeah. So I guess right now, if you look at the geopolitical risk from the supply chain perspective, again, we don't know at this point of time. There is a prediction that, at least the Ukraine war is going to stop. There's a prediction that there is going to be something in the Middle East. We don't know, if that is going to happen or not. You look at some of the other geographies. I don't know whether you heard this news today morning or not. South Korea, North Korea, they were always, there was a a little tension there, China, tension there. So there's a lot happening, I guess, in the market overall from the supply chain perspective now. So we don't know, how this is going to happen in 2025, but you will see a lot more disruption unless these wars stop completely. Now, the second factor you alluded to is the CrowdStrike or the cybersecurity one, right? So CrowdStrike was just one incident. Now, as we are learning, hackers are learning as well. They have a lot more technologies, capabilities, right? So they know that they can play with these things and how vulnerable the software supply chain are. So we are going to see a lot more risks there. We don't know at this point of time whether we are going to have this in 2025, but you will see a lot more just because the way things are going, just because the kind of infrastructure that we have, the kind of technology technologies we have, the way we have implemented. So we are just going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then coming back to this quantum technology thread that you were just talking about, Sam, this is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how soon do you think quantum technologies will be available for mainstream business applications, and what industries are likely to benefit first?
Yeah, so think of this as more of the processing capacity, I would say. And I think it's going to take a long time. So I don't think, and that's why it's probably 15 on our list, because it's not necessarily relevant for businesses unless you are investing in quantum. So if you were a rich guy like Eric Kimberling, then you would be thinking about, okay, where I can invest in these technologies right now. But overall, from the business perspective, it might take 10, 15 years before we see any sort of tangible real impact. You will see very similar announcement at ChatGPT or generative AI technology, maybe in the next 10, 15 years. But overall, I guess companies should be watching. There are companies who like to be 5, 10, 15 years ahead. If they are trying to be there, then they should be, monitoring this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this has been a great conversation, Sam. I'm curious, just as a closing question here, there's a lot of good stuff you've covered in these 15 predictions you have, and certainly the audience has brought up even additional predictions as well. But what kind of closing advice do you have to organizations that are trying to figure out, well, how do we, I don't want to get overwhelmed by all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot here to think about, but how do I create a digital strategy or roadmap for the next, say, 3 to 5 years that predict or that incorporates some of these threads into that? What are your recommendations there?
Yeah, so what I would say is do a thorough assessment of where you are. You really need to know if you have any sort of licensing pricing risks at this point of time. The kind of architecture that you have, what is the impact? What kind of impact you are going to see if these SaaS vendors are going to increase the pricing, because that is probably going to happen. This is a near-term risk for the CFOs and the CEOs, because obviously you are going to be probably hard pressed for revenue in 2025 unless things become booming, which is probably going to be a rare possibility, I guess, in 2025 at least, depending upon how the governments operate. But for the most part, you are probably going to be hard pressed for that. So now you really need to watch out your technical and financial risks. So how do you do that? You really need to perform a thorough assessment in terms of how many different SaaS applications you have. And on an average, even the smaller organizations that are probably going to have $1 million in revenue, they are probably using 20, 25, 30, 50 different SaaS applications, and they all are going to have pricing impact that you just don't know at this point of time. All of a sudden, you are going to get these bills and you are going to get a shock that, okay, how did I get here? How do I pay this? And, the migration strategy is also going to be difficult. How do you sort of move from that? So that would be my advice, that, okay, do a thorough assessment and really know what kind of applications you are using at this point of time, what could be architectural risks, what could be pricing and licensing risk at this point of time of your architecture. That's probably the best right now.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I think it's easy to get intrigued and enamored by all these different trends and cool stuff that's happening in the enterprise tech space. But you also have to be aware of this stuff, but also back up and look at what's best for my business, what's going to give me the most immediate business value, and how can I start to incrementally consume some of these new technologies and trends without feeling like I have to take it all on at once. It's a longer journey, so it's good to look to that long-term future that we're talking about here today, but you also have to kind of back up and look to where you are today and how can you start down that path to get there.
Yep.
So do you publish this somewhere? Your 15 predictions? Do you have that published on your website, or how can people find that if they want to read more detail and analysis? You guys put out really good articles and analysis, by the way, you and your team. So I think it's a good read. I highly recommend people read it. Is that something you've published?
It's the same for Eric as well. I mean, these guys do an amazing job. So make sure you guys read Eric's material as well. From our perspective, these trends are published as part of our digital transformation report. So every year we publish the report and we compile these trends. And you can go back and check, what we did in 2024.
If you're right or not.
Exactly in 2023 as well.
Yeah, it's always fun to do. And you're, like us, we put out our predictions too, and it's you get some of them right and some of them you're off, but you just all you can do is take the input and the knowledge you have right now and look to the future and try and plan for it the best you can. So I think this is really helpful stuff, and appreciate the audience being here as well. In addition to Sam, thanks for the audience for being here and asking such great questions here today. We'll edit this episode. We'll add some additional content. You'll see this released. I believe it's either 2 or 3 weeks from tomorrow. You'll see this episode, the full episode, released as a new episode of Transformation Ground Control. Again, go to transformationgroundcontrol.com if you'd like to learn more about the podcast or follow it or listen to past episodes, subscribe to it, all that good stuff. And thank you, Sam, for being here. Really appreciate it. And appreciate everyone being here today, and hope you all have a great week.